Welcome to the Bullvine Podcast. I'm your host, Bella, joined by my co-host, Douglas. Today, we're diving into a fascinating story about one of the most influential Holstein breeders you might never have heard of. How did one Canadian farmer's obsession with what he called breeding warm create maternal lines so powerful they still dominate Holstein genetics 8 decades later?
That's right, Bella. We're exploring the legacy of Douglas Dunton, a breeder whose methodical approach to developing maternal lines revolutionized Holstein genetics worldwide. His work connects directly to legendary sires like Pawnee Farm Arlinda Chief and Round Oak Rag Apple Elevation, bulls whose genetics appear in virtually every modern Holstein pedigree. This episode is packed with valuable lessons for today's breeders navigating the genomic era. We'll explore Dunton's journey, his breeding philosophy, the remarkable foundation females he developed, and how his principles remain relevant today.
So let's dig into the story of a true maternal mastermind.
Douglas Dunton's Holstein journey began in 1920 when he enrolled in a dairy short course offered by the Ontario Department of Agriculture. Until then, he and his father had been crossbreeding with dual-purpose Shorthorns on their family farm in Brampton, Ontario, with limited success. Their farm had been established in 1828 when Dunton's grandfather James arrived in Canada as a United Empire loyalist.
So what sparked his transition to Holsteins? Was there a specific moment that changed his direction?
There absolutely was. During that dairy course, Dunton visited several impressive Holstein herds that inspired him to purchase his first Holstein cow. When that cow produced 80 pounds of milk daily, twice what his Shorthorns were giving, he was completely convinced. That dramatic production difference prompted him and his father to purchase 4 more Holsteins, with 3 coming from Lorne Davidson's Bruac farm at Meadowvale.
Those initial purchases must have been important to his program?
Incredibly important. 2 of those cows, Bruac Noel and Bruac Luella Acme, became the foundation for what would become the legendary Glenview herd. All 4 of Dunton's most influential foundation females descended from those initial purchases. Talk about maximizing your investment.
We need to appreciate what breeding success meant in that era. When Dunton began breeding Holsteins, there was no classification system, no genomic testing, no production indices, none of the tools breeders rely on today. Without seeing an animal's ancestors directly to evaluate type and transmission patterns, breeders were essentially working blind.
Impressed. Yet, despite these limitations, Dunton developed a remarkably effective system for selecting breeding stock through careful observation and strategic matings. His early herd sires were grandsons of King Toitila Acme, followed by Inca Supreme Reflection, a spring farm Inca jewel son that became central to his breeding program.
Was this just a one-generation success story, or did the family continue his legacy?
The Dunton family's commitment to Holstein breeding spanned generations. When sons Ralph and Earl joined as partners in the 1950s, they earned their second Master Breeder Shield in 1964 as D.S. Dunton and Sons. Urban sprawl forced the dispersal of the original herd in 1966, but Ralph and his son Jim retained the Glenview prefix and relocated to Inglewood, Ontario.
And they kept the success going even with a completely new herd.
Absolutely. Starting with an entirely new foundation, they earned a third Master Breeder Shield in 1987, a record matched only by the Chivaleys of Forest Lee Farm. It's a testament to the strength of their breeding philosophy, rather than just the specific animals they started with.
Let's talk about what made Dunton's approach to breeding so unique. I've heard the term breeding warm. What exactly did that mean in his program?
At the heart of Dunton's approach was his unwavering belief in what he called breeding warm, which was essentially strategic line breeding. This stands in fascinating contrast to the outcross mentality that often dominates commercial breeding today. From the outset, he focused intensely on the King Toitila Acme bloodline, methodically combining it with rag apple genetics to create intriguing genetic patterns throughout his herd.
That's interesting because today we use sophisticated genomic mating programs with SNP markers to balance genetic gain with managing inbreeding. Dunton was doing something similar through observation and pedigree analysis, wasn't he?
Exactly. When asked about outcrossing, Dunton famously stated that he had tried an outcross bull only once, and while he didn't do much harm, neither did he do much good. That pragmatic assessment still resonates with breeders evaluating complementary matings today.
What I find particularly interesting is his approach to the balance between type and production. In an era when many breeders were chasing milk records above all else, Dunton took a different path.
He certainly did. His conviction that it takes longer to breed type than production, but once you get type, it is not so difficult to get higher production, reveals his understanding of the genetic architecture underlying these traits. This philosophy anticipated today's balanced breeding approach, using comprehensive merit indices by decades.
It's striking how he prioritized traits that we now consider essential for lifetime profitability, but weren't formally evaluated back then.
Absolutely. Beyond classification traits, Dunton prioritized three practical factors often overlooked in pedigrees of his era: temperament, milking ease, and longevity. These are precisely the functional traits modern breeding programs value for lifetime profitability. He was selecting for cow comfort, milkability, and productive life decades before these became formalized traits in our evaluation systems.
Let me spell out the parallels between Dunton's approach and today's methods. In terms of genetic selection, his breeding warm strategy focused on King Toitilla Acme and Rag Apple bloodlines, while today we use genomic mating programs with SNP markers to optimize genetic gain while controlling inbreeding at the molecular level.
For type versus production balance, his insight that developing type first would make production easier parallels our modern balanced breeding indexes like TPI, LPI, and net merit dollars that weight both type and production traits.
And when it comes to selection timeline, Dunton practiced patient development of females. 2-year-olds weren't pushed. If they produced 1,000 pounds of milk monthly, that was considered satisfactory. Today, we've accelerated generation intervals with genomic selection of young animals, but perhaps we could learn from his patience.
Finally, Dunton emphasized traits beyond the pedigree: temperament, milking ease, and longevity. Today, we have comprehensive genomic evaluations for health, fertility, and functional traits. The tools have changed, but the goals remain remarkably similar.
Every great breeding program starts with exceptional foundation females. Douglas, tell our listeners about the remarkable cows that form the cornerstones of Dunton's genetic program.
Dunton's program centered around 4 extraordinary cows: ABC Inca May, classified excellent; Glenview Nettie Jemima, classified excellent, 13 star; Glenview Noel Inca, classified excellent, 4; and Glenview Jean Inca B, classified very good, 2. These weren't just show winners, they were genetic powerhouses whose influence continues to reverberate through Holstein breeding today.
ABC Inca May has an unusual prefix for a Dunton-bred cow. What's the story there?
It's quite the dairy cattle soap opera. In March 1943, Dunton purchased a pregnant cow named Temple Farm May, classified very good 2, from R.S. McKinnon. While Dunton was changing clothes, Elgin Armstrong of ABC Farm stopped by Glenview with his herdsmen Cliff Chant and Jack Fraser. Fraser spotted the pregnant May in a box stall and quickly purchased her from Dunton for $400, selling her to Armstrong before the day ended.
Oh no! So he lost what would become one of his most influential females before she even calved?
That's right. Dunton agreed to keep the cow through her calving, and on March 10, 1943, she delivered a heifer calf by Inca Supreme Reflection. Since Armstrong now owned May, the calf was registered as ABC Inca May under ABC Farm's prefix. This one that got away became an all-Canadian 4-year-old in 1947 and produced 24,141 pounds of milk with 1,128 pounds of fat that same year.
But even though he didn't own her, she still had a tremendous impact on his breeding program, right?
Her most significant contribution was her son ABC, Reflection Sovereign, classified excellent extra by Montvik Rag Apple Sovereign. He became one of the most influential sires of all time for both type and production, and had a major impact on the ABC breeding program.
It reminds me of how sometimes our breeding program's most significant impact comes through unexpected channels. I've heard stories from producers who sold animals that went on to greatness elsewhere.
Now let's talk about Glenview Nettie Jemima, who many consider the ultimate brood cow of her era.
If you're looking for the ultimate brood cow, Glenview Nettie Jemima, excellent 13-star, deserves her own Hall of Fame wing. Tell us about her background.
She was a daughter of Strathaven Top Grade, classified very good, from Glenview, Nancy Palmyra, classified very good too, tracing back to Bruick Noel. She wasn't just good, she was spectacular. Nettie became an all-Canadian aged cow in 1954, but her real legacy came through her offspring.
And what offspring they were. She produced 6 excellent offspring, including perhaps the most illustrious list of sons in Holstein history. Rosef, citation R. Excellent extra, Rosef Centurion, excellent extra, Rosef Magician, excellent gold medal, Rosef Signet, excellent superior type, and Rosef Magic, excellent superior type. That's not lucky breeding. That's a cow that consistently stamped her offspring with superior genetics.
Through her son, Rosef Centurion, Nettie's bloodline reached Round Oak Rag Apple elevation. Centurion sired Glenafton Gaiety, who in turn sired the maternal grandam of elevation. This shows how great maternal genetics can travel through multiple generations without losing potency, a lesson worth considering when evaluating female lines in your herd today.
Let's talk about the other 2 foundation females that had such an impact.
Glenview Noel Inca, classified excellent for, another Inca Supreme Reflection daughter from the Bruax Noel family, achieved fame as Royal Winter Fair Grand Champion in 1947 and both All-Canadian and All-American aged cow the same year under the ownership of Solano Rios from Uruguay. When bred to Elmcroft herd sire Montvik Monogram, she produced Elmcroft Voyager M, who was used by both Dunton and Jack Fraser before being sold to Oxford Unit.
And at Glenview, Voyager produced Glenview Colleen Monogram, who became the dam of Glenview Clipper, who would later sire the dam of Pawnee Farm Arlinda Chief. So we're seeing how these foundation females created genetic pathways to the breed's most influential sires.
Completing the quartet, finally, Glenview Jean Inca B, classified very good too, was the Inca Supreme Reflection daughter of Glenview Inca Jewel, tracing to Bruac Luella Acme. She produced ABC, Bonnie Renown, and Rosef Shamrock Rosamund, further extending these influential maternal lines.
The most concrete testimony to Dunton's breeding genius lies in his connection to 2 transformational Holstein sires of the 20th century, Pawnee Farm Arlinda Chief and Round Oak Rag Apple Elevation. These iconic bulls, whose genetics pervade virtually every modern Holstein pedigree, both trace significant genetic influence through Dunton's breeding program.
Let's trace those genetic pathways. For Pawnee Farm Arlinda Chief, the connection runs through Glenview Clipper, classified very good, bred by Dunton. The pathway goes Glenview Clipper to Pawnee Farm, Glenview Beauty, classified excellent, to Pawnee Farm Arlinda Chief, classified excellent gold medal, and then to influential sons like SWD Valiant and Walkway Chief Mark.
For Round Oak Rag Apple Elevation, the connection is through Rosef Centurion, classified excellent extra, from Glenview Nettie Jemima. The pathway goes Rosef Centurion to Glenafton Gaiety, to the maternal grandam of Round Oak Rag Apple Elevation, classified excellent gold medal, and then to influential sons like Hanover Hill Starbuck.
The story of how Clipper's genetics reached Chief is particularly fascinating and illustrates the sometimes serendipitous nature of genetic influence. Dunton bred Glenview Clipper, a son of Rosef Prefect and Glenview Colleen Monogram, who would go on to sire Pawnee Farm Glenview Beauty, who became the dam of Pawnee Farm Arlinda Chief when bred to Pawnee Farm Reflection Admiral.
Yes, but Clipper's own story had some twists and turns, didn't it?
It certainly did. Lester Fischler, a Nebraska breeder focused on strictly rag apple genetics, purchased Clipper from Dunton in 1956. Despite Clipper's impressive physical stature, he eventually weighed a massive 2,880 pounds at slaughter, so tall that his head touched the ground from the slaughterhouse rail. Fischler eventually sent him to slaughter because his daughters were low testers.
Let's look at the data on Clipper's daughters. The 8 measured daughters averaged 18,504 pounds of milk with 3.40% butterfat, totaling 629 pounds of fat. Their dams averaged 15,403 pounds of milk with 3.66% butterfat, totaling 565 pounds of fat. So his daughters showed a substantial milk increase of 3,101 pounds, but their butterfat percentage dropped by 0.26%.
In that era, when component percentages were prioritized over yield, this made him undesirable to AI organizations. But today's more comprehensive economic indices would likely have valued Clipper's milk volume boost and the structural correctness he transmitted.
Despite Clipper's fate, his genetic legacy continued through an exceptional daughter, Pawnee Farm Glenview Beauty, classified excellent, out of Pawnee Farm Man-O-War Betty. When Fischler dispersed his herd in 1962, Beauty was pregnant to Pawnee Farm Reflection Admiral and was purchased for $4,300 by Wally Lindskog of Arlinda Farms in California.
The resulting calf, born May 9, 1962, was Pawnee Farm Arlinda Chief, who would become one of the most influential production sires in Holstein history. His first summary showed a remarkable plus 1,982 pounds of milk, plus 79 pounds of fat, and plus 0.61 for type. Chief's influence spread through sons such as Walkway Chief Marc, SWD Valiant, Glendale Arlinda Chief, and Milu Betty Ivanhoe Chief, creating a genetic legacy that continues to influence modern bloodlines.
When discussing extraordinary maternal line builders in Holstein history, a fascinating parallel emerges between Douglas Dunton's mid-century achievements and the more contemporary success of Marc Comtois and Comestar Holsteins. Douglas, how do these two Canadian breeders compare?
Though separated by decades, these two Canadian breeders share a remarkably similar approach to developing influential cow families, albeit with distinct applications reflecting their respective eras. Like Dunton, Marc Comtois built his program around exceptional foundation females, most notably Comestar Lori Chic, classified very good 88/27 star.
The parallels between these two breeders' approaches are striking. Both demonstrated an uncanny ability to identify foundation females with extraordinary transmitting power. Just as Dunton's quartet of foundation cows revolutionized the breed through their descendants, Lori Chic's influence has been equally profound since her birth in 1986.
Marc and France Comtois have always been firmly committed to a philosophy of logical, balanced breeding. This echoes Dunton's balanced approach to selection, with both breeders prioritizing conformation while maintaining production, though their methodologies reflect their different eras.
But there's a key difference in their approaches to genetic concentration, isn't there?
Absolutely. While Dunton was a staunch advocate of strategic line breeding, his breeding warm philosophy, Comtois has taken a different approach with the Lori Chic family. Rather than intensifying specific bloodlines, Comestar has excelled at identifying complementary crosses that enhance the family's strengths while introducing new genetic diversity.
Their golden cross moment came when Comtois bred Lori Chic to Blackstar, the #1 bull in the United States at the time. This produced multiple exceptional animals, including Comestar Lore Black, dam of Outside, Comestar Laura Black, dam of Lee and Leros, and Comestar Lausen Black, dam of Stormatic. This approach of seeking complementary outcrosses differs from Dunton's methodology, but achieves similar results regarding influential progeny.
A trademark of these bulls was that they had strong conformation and good vitality, with Leader, Lee, Leros, and Outside each producing over 1 million doses of semen. 4 millionaire sires from the same family certainly distinguishes the Lori Chics. This parallels the impact of Dunton's breeding program, which similarly produced influential sires that reshaped the breed.
The most striking similarity between these breeders is the remarkable staying power of their maternal lines. Just as Glenview genetics continue to bubble through elite Holstein pedigrees decades after Dunton's original breeding work, the Lori Sheik family remains at the forefront of the breed nearly 4 decades after her birth.
Comestar Lamadonna Dorman, classified Excellent 94, named Canada's Cow of the Year 2022, represents the Lori Sheik family's continuing evolution and influence. As one report notes, now the grandsons and great-grandsons of Lamadonna are creating a new surge of excitement. Bulls like Comestar La Magic, by Chief from an Impression Dam, exemplify the family's continued relevance in today's genomic era, 12 generations after Lori Sheik herself.
This generational persistence mirrors what we've seen with Dunton's influence. However, Comestar has had the advantage of modern breeding technologies, marketing opportunities, and global embryo distribution channels that weren't available during Dunton's era.
Indeed, the spread of Lori Sheik genetics to leading herds worldwide, including developing a European branch through the Poussemier family in Belgium, showcases how modern reproductive technologies have expanded the potential reach of exceptional maternal lines.
If Dunton were breeding today, he might appreciate the Comestar approach. Both breeders have shown a commitment to long-term vision and balanced breeding goals. Both recognize that chasing the latest trends or highest numbers isn't sufficient for creating lasting impact.
Yet, despite their differences in methodology, both breeders share a fundamental understanding that great maternal lines are the cornerstone of breed improvement. Whether through Dunton's strategic line breeding or Comtois' complementary outcrossing, both have demonstrated exceptional skill in developing cow families that reliably transmit their superior qualities across generations.
Let's talk about how today's breeders might apply Dunton's principles in the genomic era. How might Douglas Dunton approach breeding if he were active today?
While the technological landscape has transformed dramatically since Dunton's time, the fundamental genetic principles he intuitively understood remain unchanged. I think he'd balance technical tools with breeder intuition, valuing both.
Connecting Dunton's emphasis on line breeding, carefully concentrating desirable genetics while managing inbreeding, finds modern expression in genomic mating programs that use SNP markers to optimize genetic gain while controlling inbreeding at the molecular level. The analytical tools have changed, but the genetic principles remain remarkably similar.
Are you balancing the power of genomic data with breeder observation in your herd? Consider how Dunton would approach today's breeding landscape. He'd likely embrace genomics while maintaining his focus on seeing the whole animal and understanding family patterns.
I think one of the most valuable lessons from Dunton is his patience in developing young animals. His 2-year-olds were never pushed. If they produced 1,000 pounds of milk monthly, that satisfied him. This patience in developing his program, allowing slower maturing animals time to express their full genetic potential, offers a valuable counterbalance to the acceleration of generation intervals in the genomic era.
Are you giving promising young animals enough time to develop, or are you making culling decisions too quickly based on first lactation performance? Dunton's success suggests there's value in patience with genetically promising animals that may need time to express their full potential.
Perhaps most relevant to your breeding strategy is Dunton's focus on building extraordinary maternal lines rather than chasing individual phenotypes. While genomic evaluations can identify elite individuals early in life, developing consistently transmitting maternal families still requires the same patient, multi-generational approach that characterized Dunton's program.
His success challenges you to look beyond individual genomic numbers to consider how animals perform as part of genetic lineages. Are you identifying and developing your best cow families, or are you focused solely on individual animal metrics? The Glenview legacy suggests that building strong maternal lines remains fundamental to sustainable genetic progress, even in the genomic era.
So what can you apply from Dunton's approach today? First, develop a clear breeding philosophy and stick with it. Dunton's consistent application of line breeding principles, emphasis on balanced traits, and focus on maternal families created a coherent genetic direction.
Second, look beyond genomic numbers to evaluate family patterns. While genomics provides unprecedented insights into genetic potential, building sustainable genetic progress still requires attention to how genetics express themselves across generations.
Third, balance type and production in your selection decisions. Dunton's insight that it takes longer to breed type than production, but once you get type, it is not so difficult to get higher production, remains relevant in an era of comprehensive selection indices.
Fourth, value the practical traits that drive profitability. Dunton stressed temperament, milking ease, and longevity, factors directly impacting your bottom line through reduced labor, improved efficiency, and extended productive life.
And finally, be patient with promising genetic lines. Dunton recognized that genetic expression takes time and was willing to allow promising animals to develop fully. In our rush to accelerate genetic progress, this patience may be the most countercultural yet valuable lesson we can learn from him.
As we wrap up our discussion of Douglas Dunton's breeding legacy, I'm struck by how his methodical, patient approach to breeding offers a valuable framework for building a sustainable, profitable herd even in today's genomic era. The Glenview legacy, still evident in Holstein pedigrees worldwide, is testimony to the enduring power of thoughtful breeding built on fundamental genetic principles.
What would Douglas Dunton think about today's dairy breeding landscape? He'd likely appreciate our technological advances while reminding us that the foundation of excellent breeding remains unchanged. Identify exceptional cow families, concentrate their best genetics through strategic matings, and select for balanced traits that create profitable, functional dairy cows. Some wisdom never goes out of style.
Let's recap the key takeaways from today's discussion. First, line breeding with purpose works. Dunton's strategic breeding warm approach concentrated desirable genetics while managing inbreeding, showing that thoughtful line breeding can be more effective than indiscriminate outcrossing when building consistent family traits.
Second, maternal power outweighs individual merit. The most enduring genetic contributions come through families, not individuals. Dunton's focus on developing transmitting maternal lines created a multi-generational impact that continues 8 decades later, a blueprint for sustainable breeding programs.
Third, balanced traits for lasting influence. Dunton prioritized balanced trait selection, believing it takes longer to breed type than production, but once you get type, it is not so difficult to get higher production, a philosophy that anticipated today's comprehensive selection indices.
Fourth, patience yields greater rewards. Dunton never pushed young animals, allowing 2-year-olds producing just 1,000 pounds monthly to remain in his program. This patience with promising genetics offers a valuable counterbalance to the accelerated generation intervals of the genomic era.
And finally, a clear breeding philosophy creates coherent results. Whether through Dunton's line breeding or Comestar's complementary outcrossing, successful breeders develop and consistently apply a clear breeding philosophy rather than chasing trends.
Is your breeding program building the maternal strength that will influence the breed for generations to come? That's the true measure of breeding success that Douglas Dunton's legacy challenges us to achieve. For the Bovine Podcast, I'm Bella, along with Douglas, thanking you for joining us. Until next time, happy breeding.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on maternal line breeding in the genomic era. Visit our website at www.thebulvine.com to leave a comment on this episode or to find our complete article on Douglas Dunton's breeding philosophy. Thanks for listening.